So, when you hear the word Machiavellian, what actually comes to mind? Let me guess. Ruthless cunning, backstabbing, maybe a total lack of a moral compass, right? We immediately picture this dark world where power is literally the only thing that matters, and getting it justifies any amount of cruelty. But what if I told you that the actual guy behind this legacy, Niccolò Machiavelli, has a story that is widely misunderstood? Let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the fascinating, completely contradictory, and honestly deeply tragic reality of history's most infamous two-faced philosopher.
Okay, picture this. We're in Europe, a long time ago. A powerful ruler swoops in, attacks a neighboring city, and completely conquers it. Naturally, this city descends into absolute chaos. We're talking murders, robberies, riots, the whole shebang. To fix this mess, the ruler brings in a deputy, hands him absolute power, and essentially says, "Restore order. I don't care how you do it. No mercy." And boy, does this deputy deliver. He goes straight to work with mass executions and horrific torture. Within just a few months, order is completely restored through pure unadulterated fear. But as you'd expect, the traumatized citizens absolutely despise this deputy. So what's the ruler's next move? He comes back, grabs his own loyal deputy, drags him into the public square, and literally cuts his body in half right in front of the stunned crowd. It's brutal. The people are left in utter shock, but also there's this immense relief and satisfaction. With that one single horrific move, the ruler got exactly what he wanted: absolute order plus the love and gratitude of his newly conquered people.
Now, if you or I heard that story today, we'd probably be horrified, right? We'd see it as the ultimate example of power-mad brutality. But the philosopher who actually wrote that gruesome tale down in his famous book, The Prince, he saw it completely differently. He actually praised the ruler's actions as a literal masterstroke of political genius. He argued the ruler did exactly what was smart, wise, and absolutely necessary. And this is exactly what cemented his dark legacy and gave us the phrase we all know, "The ends justify the means." His whole point was that even if the method is incredibly cruel, well, if it achieves stability and power, then it's the right move.
But hold on, because here is the massive plot twist. While The Prince is basically the ultimate tyrant's playbook, the exact same man wrote a totally different book. It's called Discourses on Livy, and you'll have a much harder time finding it, because in this text, Machiavelli flips the script entirely. He is a passionate, dedicated defender of republicanism and democracy. I mean, he distinguishes between a lower system where people are just kept safe by a strong man and a perfect system where true freedom actually thrives through public participation and open debate. Get this, he even wrote that ordinary citizens are usually much smarter than princes. He argued it's super easy to convince one single person to do something stupid, but it is almost impossible to trick an entire crowd.
So this stark contradiction brings us directly to the central mystery we have to solve today. How on earth could Niccolò Machiavelli simultaneously advocate for ruthless, bloodthirsty dictators and the ultimate democratic freedom of the people? I mean, are we dealing with a villain here, a hero, or someone else entirely? Well, to figure out how he could write two completely opposing political frameworks, we have to look at the massive shift he created in how human beings actually think about government.
To crack this case, we have to realize that Machiavelli effectively blew up the entire way humans thought about politics. For centuries, going all the way back to heavyweights like Plato and Socrates, the absolute golden rule was that politics must be rooted in morality and virtue. Socrates argued that justice is never just the will of the strongest. But Machiavelli, he essentially brought that old argument back from the dead and said, actually, let the strong win. Echoing the brilliant Arab scholar Ibn Khaldun, who also pointed out that political power runs on fixed laws, not moral virtues, Machiavelli argued that the world is just a brutal jungle. He completely stripped away the guilt and the ethics. He said politics, much like nature, has absolutely nothing to do with morality. It's simple. You either eat or you get eaten.
And by stripping away that illusion of morality to focus entirely on the raw, unvarnished mechanics of power, historian Quentin Skinner points out something fascinating. He argues that Machiavelli effectively conceptualized the modern state as we know it today. He defined it as an impersonal government wielding power over a defined territory. Skinner notes that despite all this talk of tyranny, Machiavelli was really just caught between two worlds: the world of absolute, ruthless rule and the world of law, order, and liberty. In fact, if you look at his broader life's work, freedom actually appears to be his true core value.
Now, Machiavelli didn't just invent these intense, borderline cynical theories out of thin air while sitting in some cozy armchair. Not at all. These ideas were forged in the absolute fires of 15th century Italy. Born in Florence in 1469, he grew up in a deeply fractured land. You have to remember, Italy wasn't the unified, beautiful country we know today. It was this chaotic collection of independent, constantly squabbling city-states that were incredibly vulnerable to foreign invasions. This wasn't just some abstract political theory playing out on the nightly news. Back then, politics was a literal matter of life and death, happening right outside your front door. It was a dangerous place where showing weakness meant total destruction.
Just take a look at the dizzying instability of Florence to really grasp what he was dealing with. First, you had the city ruled by the despotic, though culturally rich Medici family. But then, there's a violent uprising led by a religious extremist named Savonarola, which plunges Florence into a terrifying 4-year religious dictatorship. We're talking inquisitions, purges, total terror. Then Savonarola gets executed, and from the ashes, a fragile republic is born. It was just this crazy, dizzying pendulum swinging from tyranny to religious extremism and finally to a super fragile democracy.
And right in the middle of this, at just 29 years old, Machiavelli actually rises to prominence within this newly formed republic. He starts serving as a diplomat and chancellor. This job had him traveling all over Europe, observing completely different political systems. It taught him to view politics not just as local street drama, but as an abstract, universal game. And during this era, he was incredibly passionate. He dedicated his life to defending the Republic, actively working behind the scenes to keep the authoritarian Medici family out of power permanently.
But then, his entire world violently collapsed. Despite his absolute best efforts, the Medicis returned to power in 1512, and they had the formidable military might of the Pope backing them up. Machiavelli's big gamble on the Republic completely failed. He was immediately stripped of his political position, and then it got so much worse. He was thrown into a cell, brutally tortured, and finally banished to the countryside. Just like that, his political career, the very thing he lived and breathed for, was completely annihilated.
And you know what? That brings us to the most shocking truth about the prince. It wasn't some supervillain's master plan for world domination. Honestly, it was arguably the most desperate, cynical cover letter ever written. Exiled, isolated, and deeply depressed, Machiavelli just wrote down everything he had learned about the brutal reality of politics. He packaged it all up as a straightforward, pragmatic guide to flatter the newly returned Medici rulers. Why? Because he was just hoping to prove his intelligence and get his old job back.
And this right here is the ultimate tragic irony of Machiavelli's entire life. Fundamentally, deep down, he was a Republican who genuinely believed in freedom and public debate. Yet, because he saw how weak his city was, and because he was so utterly desperate to get back into the political arena, he wrote a literal how-to guide for tyrants. He shelved his moral ideals and embraced this purely ruthless, pragmatic strategy just to navigate his way back to power. Essentially, he committed the ultimate Machiavellian maneuver on himself.
But wow, did that maneuver backfire? The Medici family actually read his ruthless little masterpiece, all this intense advice on manipulation, deception, and power. And instead of being impressed enough to hire him, they basically looked at it and thought, wait a second, a guy who understands deception and backstabbing this well? Yeah, no way. Keep him as far away from us as possible. His own brilliant, deep understanding of deception made him completely unemployable to the exact same tyrants he was trying to impress.
So that one calculated gamble completely ruined his legacy. The tactic was a total failure. He died in political exile, never once returning to the halls of power he loved so much. His genuine Republican ideals, his actual belief in the intelligence of the masses, and the crucial importance of liberty were totally overshadowed. Instead, his name became a permanent global synonym for evil, deceit, and cruelty. He became the ultimate victim of his own Machiavellian strategy. It just goes to show that short-term, ruthless tactics can sometimes be utterly destructive in the long run.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Think about historical giants like Napoleon, Mussolini, or Stalin, leaders who actually read The Prince with intense interest. They, along with arguably plenty of modern politicians today, operate in a world that often looks exactly like the brutal, morally disconnected jungle Machiavelli described. But if The Prince was never actually a genuine philosophical stance, if it was really just the tragic, desperate mask of a broken man trying to get his job back, why do so many modern leaders still treat it as the absolute gospel of power? Are they just playing an ancient game of survival, or are they wearing the exact same tragic mask?